I could not believe what I was seeing. I could have filled the back of his head with 5.56, which is an absolute joke.
Well, it's not an ape, because if the Sasquatch was an ape, we would already have one.
What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have Deb joining us from the UK and Stu. Folks, how are we doing today?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm fine, thank you.
Really great that you guys took the time to talk to us. Tom, do you want to start off?
Yes, awesome. Deb, Stu, I want to thank you guys for coming on the show. And Stu, I'm just going to hand it off to you. Just fill us in. What kind of an encounter did you have? And tell us what happened.
Well, my first encounter was June 2015. And I had friends over from Australia. And I took my son out on a day hike to an area I'd been hundreds of times before. So we're walking along the trail, sort of like a gravel trail, drops off about 50, 60 foot on your right-hand side, and your left-hand side is sort of thick pine forest, lots of rhododendron bushes. And there was no breeze, perfect, still, nice warm day. And all of a sudden there was this stink. It was absolutely foul, this smell. So we both noticed it, and I said to the young lad, we'll have a look in, we'll step in, and maybe there's a dead deer, we could get the antlers, something like that. So we stepped in, maybe 10 yards into the brush, and there was this bang, like crashing through the undergrowth. You could actually see the rhododendron bushes moving, heading away from us. And that lasted maybe 10 seconds, something like that. And when it's all stopped, the smell went as well. Horrible smell. It was like wet animal, body odor, really bad, really strong. So, we stepped out the bush, carried on with our day hike, and came back the same area. No smell at all. So, I just thought, I didn't really think much of it. And a couple of weeks later, I was watching, something on TV about, the North American Sasquatch, and it said about the smell,
Mm-hmm.
So I started a little bit digging, and that led me to Deb at British Bigfoot Research, and so it's all taken off from there, really.
Stu, let me ask you, so you didn't know about the association with the foul smell and Sasquatch before doing your research, is that right?
Nope. And I'd seen documentaries on TV about Patty and stuff like that, but I didn't know anything about the smell. No.
Let me ask you a little bit about that. I've experienced it. Will's experienced it. So you're walking along this pathway, and you said you had two other people with you?
No, it was just me and one other young lad. He was 14 at the time.
Okay, and he smelled it as well?
Yeah, he smelled it as well, yeah.
Okay, all right. And you said the bushes were being thrashed, the rhododendrons, right?
You could see them being sort of pushed up, maybe 30, 40 yards away. You could see the bushes being pushed, and the saplings being pushed out the way. It was really weird. And, I thought at the time, oh, well, maybe it was a deer, but the deer we get in Northumberland aren't really big enough to do, to make that kind of racket. The deer we've got here, they're quite small. They're not much bigger than a Labrador, to be honest. And it was something much bigger than that.
Right. And I'm just guessing if the deer in Northumberland and UK in general are anything like our deer, that's not their behavior. They usually take off when people are around. Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, the roe deer here are very, very timid. If you're lucky, you can walk up on one, but most of the time, as soon as they get any idea that there's humans about, they're gone, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, so continue on. That's very interesting.
So I started researching. I started getting really into it. I mean, I've been hunting and spent like wild camping for most of my life, and I'd sort of it joined in with my outdoor life, you know. So I started researching a bit more and bit more. Got to know Deb and the other members of BBR. You know, they give us loads of encouragement, loads of help and advice, and little research tips and stuff like that. And then I think it was April the following year. Is that right, Deb? In April the following.
Yeah.
I was up, and there's a place I like to go in my research area, and it's the site of an Iron Age fort.
Mm-hmm.
And I always go in the same way, stop in the same place for 5 minutes, and then have a wander around, and I always come out the same way. So I'd stopped on my way out, and I just picked up my phone and snapped over my shoulder and sent the photos. I think it was on the team chat. I put the photos on, and the guys noticed something in the background, and I would say it's maybe 40 yards away behind me, going between two trees. There's a very muscular, very, very muscular figure. Sort of almost blending in with the background, it's like a greenish grey in the background, and it looks like I'd caught one on camera. Seemed to be carrying an infant, didn't it, Deb?
It did. It was the grass. I would say was probably about 3.5 feet high. So whatever was there, it was kind of crouched at the side of the tree, and it was one of those anomalies where when you see it, you can't unsee it. But he must have been incredibly close, and a little bit of the background he's not really told you. Stu's, he's an outdoors man, so he's always outdoors. And the area that he's in is on the northeast coast of England, so very similar to probably Maine, New York State, something like that, where the hunting culture is still very present. So they used to, when I first met Stu and he told me what had happened, I was really interested because I knew that he's not coming from the town going out into the wilds for the first time. So he's not misidentifying a natural animal for that area. And I can't count how many reports there are from the edge, the county that Stu lives in, the edge of it touches Scotland. So the reports go from way down south from London all the way along the east coast, following, as we discussed last time, the high ranges. So almost following the deer, So when he came forward to me and told me about that, one of the things I advise is to go to the same area over and over again. It might be 3 or 4 years before you get anything. But if you do the same routine each time and you're not appearing as a threat, I think over time they worry less about you. And I think you said, Tom, it happened the same for you, didn't it? Where you go to the same area over and over and over, and suddenly you get a bit of activity.
Yeah, that's kind of been my experience, yes. And I'm not sure it's a good thing, but yeah, yes.
I think, and then it was probably about 18 months after that, wasn't it, Stu, when you had your actual eyes on sighting?
Yeah. That day started with, I leave like marbles, big marbles, and I leave them in a pattern. And when I go back, the marbles have changed pattern. So it was becoming a bit like a game of chess. So I'd put 3 blue marbles and a green one, and I'd go back and the green one would be missing. So it'd just be the 3 blue, or I'd put three green marbles and 2 blue. And I would come back, say, a month later, and the marbles had been moved to green, blue, green, blue, green, blue.
Mm.
And I think that was the day when all the marbles had gone, but
Yeah.
there was 2 pigeon feathers laid. They looked like angel wings, but they'd been laid out on the tree stump where I'd been leaving the marbles. So I was like, oh, right. And a pine cone landed next to us. So I'm looking up in the tree, seeing if there's any squirrels and stuff like that. And another one, and there was maybe 6 or 7 pine cones landing at my feet. And then one hit us in the chest, hit us straight in the centre of my chest. I mean, it didn't hurt. They were, and then I started noticing that they weren't dropping vertically, they were coming horizontally over the other side of the rhododendron bush. So I threw one back, and they totally stopped. So I dropped my rucksack, ran round the other side of the rhododendron bush, and nothing. Couldn't see anything. So I came round to get my pack and bent down. When I stood back up, I looked to my right, and there was... all I could see was, I would say, chest, arms and head, coming downhill, maybe 40, 50 yards away from us. Very dark, I would call it like a dark blonde hair, no neck, very powerful, wide shoulders, coming downhill. And it turned its head and looked at us, and then just looked away and carried on walking down the hill. And the thing that struck us at the time wasn't what I'd seen, it was the fact that it was leaning forwards, walking downhill. Now, you know yourself, when you're walking down a steep hill, you naturally lean backwards, don't you? To keep your balance. But this wasn't. It was actually leaning forwards, coming down the hill. Didn't hear any footsteps, didn't hear any noise. And it just sort of walked past us and turned its head, looked at us, and then looked back where it was going. And I ran towards it, where I'd seen it walking past, and didn't see a damn thing. Nothing there at all. So that was the rest.
Hey, Stu, did you get a look at his face at all?
Yes, I did, yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you describe it a little bit?
Neanderthal. Long hair. Almost not ape-like at all. Definitely Neanderthal looking. Very heavy set. Heavy brow ridge. Heavy chin. Very square jaw. Flat nose. Sort of what I would describe as, when guys have a long beard and it's a bit unkempt, like that on his face. Very, very thick eyebrows. Haircut, like on its head, on its shoulders, maybe 6 to 8 inch long, dirty blonde. It was just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. And I was there researching, so really I shouldn't have been that surprised. But the last thing I thought of doing was pull my phone out of my pocket and take a photograph. Dark eyes. Couldn't really see the whites of its eyes, but dark eyes. And there was no... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There was no expression on its face when it looked at us. That's what got it as well. There was no sort of look of surprise or disgust or like any facial recognition of me when it looked at us. That was odd. I would have sort of expected some sort of raise of the eyebrows or something like that. But, yeah, no acknowledgement of me at all. No.
Okay, so and when you talk about Neanderthal, I want to maybe get some details on like the jaw size and then how big the mouth was. Did the mouth, did it go all the way back to the ears almost, or did you have a chance to notice that?
I would say the mouth was maybe slightly bigger than a human's, but it not out of proportion, if you know what I mean. It didn't sort of stretch round into its cheeks or anything like that. The nose was quite flat, like a broken nose, like a boxer's nose.
Same for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the placement of the eyes, the eye sockets? Were they kind of like higher up than you would expect to see on a person?
No, they seem to be closer together than a human, to me.
Oh, closer together, you mean?
Seem to be a little bit closer together than a regular human. Seem to me.
It was the walk that interested me because, I mean, there's some very famous American footage, and I'm not sure what state it's from, but it's of a figure walking down a ridgeline. And most of us, our centre of balance, you kind of push yourself backwards almost to level out. And there are a number of reports here in the UK and worldwide of a figure going down a very steep incline, but leaning forwards almost. There's a very similar one on the northeast coast of Ireland. Similar situation. It's a guy who's used to being out there. He's in camo, but not because he was hunting, just because it's his outdoor gear. So I don't think the creature saw him. He was within the wood line, and it did the same thing. It walked down the Sperry Mountains, which are incredibly steep, huge mountain range in the northeast of Ireland, and that was a similar thing. It was almost leaning forward as it went down. Yeah,
and that slope that he was walking down, I would say it was maybe 40-degree slope, and he was leaning forward.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's, if you and I did that, Stu, we'd be on our face, right?
Yeah. I tried it, and I was going to fall over. I still go back to the same area, sit and have my lunch in the same area. There hasn't been any movement of the marbles for, I would say, maybe 4 months now. So I want
to talk a little bit about the area. I'm looking at Northumberland on Google Earth, and I kind of zoom in, and pleasantly surprised that it's a very, at least from Google Earth, it looks like a very rugged, and looks like there's a fair amount of, actually it's a very remote area. Can you kind of describe the area where you were?
And is, well, the county itself is about 2,000 square mile. No cities in it. Population's about 37,000, something like that. So there's not many people in quite a lot of space. There's a few small towns, villages, mostly farmland and forests. The area that I go to is an ancient forest, but it's surrounded by managed pines.
Yeah.
With this little ancient forest in the middle, quite craggy, quite hilly, lots of drop-offs, little lakes, rivers, streams, stuff like that,
For me, it's a smaller version of like Vermont or Georgia, to kind of put it into perspective. It's your deep valleys, high mountain ranges, and the history of reports in this. And what else? You've got lots of. You've got the Kielder Hills, you've got the Simonside Hills. There's lots of mountain ranges all kind of meet together in that area as well. And you can cross from the north coast to the east coast there quite easily without coming to a big town at all. So you could cross England really. And I mean, how far away is it from Scotland, Stu? At some points, it's a step over the wall, isn't it?
Yeah, literally. You drive up the road and there's a stone saying England, and you step on the other side of the stone and it says Scotland. So it's literally a yard, one step, and you're from England, Scotland. I mean, Kielder Forest up here, it's the largest man-made forest in Europe, and it is vast. It's huge.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at it right now. It's absolutely immense. And then you just go, like you said, not too far. And I think it's called Hadrian's Wall. And you
Yeah.
just, you got England on one side, Scotland on the other. So it really looks, if I ever make it out there, that's a place I'm going to have to go to. It'd be my kind of place. It really looks interesting.
It's also coastal, and people forget that about the area because it's so mountainous, and people think, they never lay in the coast. It's so easy to follow all of those estuaries in to the mountainside, and Stu himself lives on the coast, so you've got all of the resources that those extra places provide.
Yeah, all the rivers here, you've got the Tweed, the Till, the Wansbeck, they all run down through the countryside into the sea. And there's a river, maybe 10 minutes from me, the Wansbeck, and there's a spot there, and the archaeologists found it was a bone dump, and it was full of, right on the bank of the estuary, and it was full of elk bones, Irish elk bones, deer bones, wild boar, stuff like that, and that's 5 minutes up the road from me.
Oh wow! Is that the Humber, or is that a different river?
No, the Wansbeck, the Humber's further south.
Yeah.
Okay,
There are reports around there, though, Tom.
Okay.
That's where you need to be looking from about Middlesbrough up to the border of Scotland. It's massive. It's a massive area. There's a Northumberland National Parks in there, Kielder Forest, as I say. There's lots and lots of, there's Harwood. That's another area where we get lots of reports. And they come in from the wild campers, the people canoeing along the rivers and camping out at the night. Walkers.
Oh, really?
Walkers make reports of them. Even because it's so rural, some of the bush routes might only run twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
You get them very early in the morning or very late at night. So even those bus drivers at dawn and dusk are making the reports. One of them said he saw it twice in a 1 month period. It was about 6 a.m. in the morning, so it would have been quite dark at that time. And it was standing at the side of the forest, and it was examining the tree somehow, and it just stepped back into the wood line when he came along. And about a month later, you get a bus full of children at the time as well, and they all saw it. And it happened again about a month later, same spot. Look, he said it looked like the same creature, and it just crossed from one side of the road to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. When did this happen?
That was Aniston, so it would have been last year, so winter of 2018, spring of 2019, so quite recently. But there are reports that go, as I say, there's a long history, so much so that the people in the area talk about boggarts and the dwarf people and the hairy men. And so it's an area where it's deep in the history as well, if you get what I mean. So you could go from there to any area in the UK you wanted to go to just using the river systems alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
what's the perspective? Here in the U.S., what you're describing is very similar. You have historic precedents, and the locals, the people that live there, they have their own regional names for them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they call them the Screaming Witches or whatever. And so, but they kind of keep quiet, or they keep that information to themselves. Is it kind of the same thing there in the UK? The locals know what's going on, but they keep somewhat quiet about it.
I mean, I'm sure the guys that work on the forestry, I'm sure they know more than they would let on if you asked them. There definitely seems to be a code of silence among the forestry workers and the farmers, and I'm absolutely positive they've had experiences themselves, but I don't know whether they've been told not to say anything, or they just don't want to, or fear of ridicule.
I can think of one report where it is forestry workers and it's a howl that they've heard. So they've been walking off site at the end of the day, and they've heard a howl coming from where they've been working. I'm sure that was Morpeth, but I'll have to Don't quote me on that. I'll have to get my map out and have a look. But yeah, there is a report from forestry workers.
It was along the river at Mitford.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
That was the one, yeah.
Again, it's interesting because that's really parallel to what we have over here. The forestry workers are the ones, they're in the forest, so they're going to be the ones who are most likely to have the most contact. But I like the way you put it, a code of silence, and I think there is a either self-imposed or otherwise a code of silence. And for goodness sakes, nobody who wants to be ridiculed, right?
Yeah, there is that, and it's a working class area as well. So you've got some fishermen, miners, people out in the fields, farmers. So you've got some hard drinking, hard fighting men there as well. So, but the reports do come in. I mean, on that corridor alone, there are at least 30 reports of an upright, hairy, caveman-like, 7-foot dark figure moving off into the trees. Lots of reports of bluff charges. So the road is shaking or saplings being snapped and lots of noise being made. So that's the area where one of our researchers was actually hit in the face with a stone. And honestly, it was his own fault because he'd pushed and pushed and pushed a number of times and a number of warnings. And he got hit in the face, and he actually took a team of people in, and he got chased out of the woods. Lots of things being thrown at them and everything. So I asked him to stay away from that area for a while. I didn't think what he'd done was right.
No, I don't. I agree with you, Deb. It wasn't right, I think when you start pushing, if you push at something, it's going to push back, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think the route's that old. And I think even early humans were using that foraging route, so there's going to be some movement up and down there. And I just think he probably moved them on. They might have used that area, you know what I mean, for millennia, and then he's gone in and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed because it went quiet there for about 18 months.
Yeah.
There's one lady that's researching it at the minute, and she's doing it from a completely different set. So I'm hoping we'll get some more activity.
Let me ask you this. Kind of a question I have, somebody getting hit in the face with a stone, and that can be indicative of, I guess where I'm going with this. Have you heard any reports, something a bit darker, where people have vanished, just turned up missing, and they can't find them?
Not any of my researchers. I've not heard of that yet, but we're early days here, Tom, in the UK. So we're probably about 200, 300 of us at the moment. So I've never heard that, but there are lots of people that go missing, men mostly, along the river systems and within the woodlands. Lots of bodies are found and declared no suspicious circumstances, but there's no explanation. And there are cases where the police have made reports where they've been watching a crime scene in the woodland and something's come running at them through the bushes. So, yeah, there are reports of strange deaths in the UK, but we can't pin them to the cryptid sightings, if you get what I mean. So what I do is I look in the area around any sighting report that comes in, and it's males between 18 and about 36 in age that suddenly vanished from the woodland, or just they found them dead and no explanation for why they're dead in there. Yeah.
Well, can you remember the guy that was found, the homeless guy that was found? Was he decapitated then?
Yeah, but I can't. You know more about that one than I do. He was decapitated, and they declared it as no suspicious circumstances, and it wasn't in the public's interest to have an inquiry.
That was it, yeah.
We've got farmers there as well. Sorry, Tom, but we've got farmers reporting strange animal kills. So not your typical cat kill around the neck, not your typical dog kill, lots and lots of bites. You need a hand to do this. So whatever it is putting the hand between the skin and the meat and fleshing it out like you would a chicken or a deer. So you're taking that skin away from the meat. The meat's stripped from the bone completely, like almost bleached white the bones are, and then they put back with the fleece and not taken, and the head's usually left on and that kind of thing. So it doesn't look like poachers. It doesn't look like natural animal predation. And it stretches all the way up to the very tip of Scotland. The same kind of kills are being found. And recently this week, we found out that there's a number of them in Cornwall, so completely as far south as you can go.
Yes.
Similar thing where these sheep have been taken out of a pen that's about 4 feet high, big ewes, pulled over, skinned out, no sign of a tool or anything like that, nothing on the bones to suggest human, completely stripped clean and just left there with the head attached.
Yeah. Skin.
What about
skin,
the internal organs?
All gone, everything gone, completely gone. So you've just got this bleached skeleton, no legs at all. So it's just the rib cage, the spinal column, and the head. But the way that the skin's been removed, it's not been tore off. It's been a hand has been placed between that fleece and that meat, and the skin's been removed in a quite natural way.
Yeah, just the same in a deer, you know, sort of like you make the cut and then you get your hand and you work it away from the skin with the hide away from the flesh.
Exactly like that. Yeah, exactly like that. And you always leave a bit of flesh or fat on the bone. There's usually a few tool marks.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen them, haven't we? We all know what a poacher's kill. These are farmers who are used to getting, they're saying these, we cannot explain these. And when I look, it's been going on since 1920s. It's just not being reported.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting because we have virtually identical reports, actually photographs of that going on here. What about like with the legs? You know, I'm kind of interested if maybe there's been, you know, like some of the limbs or anything have been dismembered, but no tool use, just, you know,
it's just
snapped.
gone. Yeah, they're not there on there's no sign of the legs. So whatever it is, it's being picked completely clean. So you're not even seeing any ligament or where the leg's been removed from. What you're left with is just the vertebrae and the rib cage. But there's not a piece of it completely picked clean. And we could say, right, well, they've been out there a while. So, you know, natural predation would pick them clean. But the farmer the case I worked on this weekend, he checked his sheep on the Friday. I had a count, he had 110. And in the morning, it was a dog walker that phoned the police. They came out to the farm. She'd spotted it was 2 ewes that had been taken and left in that way. So it wasn't left out there for weeks. And then it's probably only been out there 12, 13 hours.
Yeah.
No sign
Okay, that was the question. You're going exactly.
Yeah. So
you answered my question before I asked.
We're checking things like that. There's no sign of an ATV. There's no sign of like a truck coming in. There's no human detriment. Someone said, oh, they've probably been boiled. And the farmer just scoffed at that because he said, I'd have seen the fire on my land. There was nothing unusual happening that night. And the other strange thing about it was all of the other cattle, all of the other sheep were worried. They were all penned in one area by themselves. Well, we all know that that's predator. If there's a predator around, that's what they'll do. But it's just that this from Johnny Groats to what's the other end? Land's End. There's this consistent strange kill going on, and I never put the pieces together until all these recent reports started to come in, and then I started researching back and thinking, oh Lord, it's been it's been going on quite a long time.
Yeah. I mean, look at the guy you interviewed last week who'd been out at night shooting, and they found the sheep's carcass still steaming.
Yeah. Do you mind if I talk about that one, Tom? It's a little bit gruesome.
Oh no, that goes with the topic. Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, basically where I live, there's a lot of moorland, and so you've got some real high moorland mountain areas, and where they are, you tend to get the radio masts put there. So there's a place called Winter Hill here, and it's moorlands. You've got a lot of woods in the valley below. And as you go through the grasslands, there's lots of sheep, but there's lots of rabbits and things like that. And one of the popular things to do is to go rabbiting. So got 2 lads, they've got out the cats about 12:30 at night, not this weekend, the weekend before. So winter, so quite cold. They've only got air rifles. They haven't got they haven't got major shotguns or anything like that. And you've got no real roads up there, so it's just little trails. So you've really got to watch where you're putting your feet. It's pitch black. There's no lighting or anything like that. And the town's quite a long way down in the valley. He's shining the torch and he says, "Oh, look out." And they nearly stood on this dead sheep, which is not unusual. I mean, it could have been, at the time, you're probably thinking bloke, but they're looking at it. And he said it looked like the rib cage had been forced apart, almost ripped apart. And as they're discussing, what do you think this is? This huge growl comes out of the darkness at them. And they said whatever it was, it kind of encircled them. And as they made their way back to the car, it made its way back to the car with them, growling all the time. And he said it made a huffing noise like a bear. Well, there are no bear in the UK, I can assure you. But he kept saying, it kept going, ooh, ooh, like that. And they really were quite panicked, and they got in the car. And luckily, one of the gentlemen, his girlfriend, kind of knows me because we had our paths had crossed in the last 12 months. So he made the report instantly, and we were able to get a chap to go out the next day. He interviewed them, then he took them to the area and interviewed them at the area there, and they found another dead sheep. Similar situation. They said it was still steaming the night before, so it must have been an incredibly recent kill. And on the second kill, the head of the ewe had been forced into the stone wall.
Oh.
The head of the ewe was pushed into the stone wall?
Pushed into the stone wall.
Oh.
It was just, and he said you could see the vertebrae. It was lined up underneath. And it looked like it'd almost been... The way I would have described it is as if someone had held its ears or its horns and banged it against the wall.
Yeah. Because the walls, they're not
The
solid
old-
walls. Sort of made
the
of
old
both.
stone ones,
Dry stone walls, yeah.
Mm.
It was like a stone wall of loose stones. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. It felt perfect. Like I think they do it with fireplaces in the US. I've seen it like that, where you're just kind of balancing the rocks perfectly. But yeah, it was just a very strange incident. It came in this weekend, so that's a case that I've handed off to the investigator, and he'll just keep reporting back on it for me. They did find other information in 1995. I took a report on exactly that bit of the moor, and it was a young lass who said she saw a bare-headed man, completely naked and covered in hair, but his body was like a human, but his head looked like a bear. And then we've had a report from a police officer who lived on the moor and said that he moved himself and his wife back to Liverpool. Now, it's like going from the worst town ever to the beautiful moorland and then taking yourself back, because he said the things that he saw in the moor at night when he was driving home was just too frightening. He couldn't put up with it anymore. They left the cottage and went.
Yeah, it was too much, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. The one that they said looked like a bear. Here we have what's type 1s, 2s, 3, and 4. Type 3s are it's got like a simian snout, almost like a baboon snout to it, but they're very uncommon. They're kind of rare. It just makes me wonder if this might be something similar. It's interesting.
Yeah, it could be like this beast of seven shoots that baboon look, because they do use that word. So you'll get the very typical caveman, hair-covered Neanderthal will get mentioned, or they'll say it's very apish or like chimp-like or gorilla-like. And this baboon is snouted, hair-covered man's body, but definitely with a snouted... I was going to say beak, but that's completely the wrong word. Like an Alsatian or like a mastiff, people say. So I think they're just describing like a bear's snout kind of thing. And I think in England they just don't know what word to put to it, and they'll see it go down to 4 legs and up onto 2. So they're just going to go for the word that anything that can describe what they're kind of seeing in front of them.
Mm.
What kind of, I'm really interested in the, going way back historically. I think Woodwose is one of the names for these creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What can you tell us a little bit about the, I don't want to say necessarily ancient history, if you know that, but even just going back to medieval times, what do you know about some of the names and creature descriptions going back?
Well, they were very first mentioned in Caesar's diaries by Pliny, and he mentioned them, and he called them the men of the trees. But in our actual history, the written history, and they're in the churchyards and things like that, simply because we've always had, religion's the wrong word, but our very early beliefs were that there was the Woodwose lived within the woods, but that name didn't come in until about the 12th century. So people have their own kind of name for it. So when you're looking for it, you've got to look for the regional names. It started going into law, so you'd see it written in law books about the 15th, 16th century. So there's actually one girl who was impregnated by, very like this Sabrina story from America. She's claimed that she was impregnated by the Woodwose. Before that, they'd call him the wild man, so like the wild man of Yalom. They're even called orcs in some areas. But what you're talking about is a hair-covered figure that's taller than a man, broader than a man, that hides within the trees. So you'll often see them depicted as what we call a Greenman, which is eyes looking through the greenery.
Mm-hmm.
We used to celebrate them, and still do in some places. May Day was made around them and things like that. There's lots of smaller villages where they still celebrate it. And there's just isn't a whole lot of written. It's more oral history. It's like for the Native Americans, a lot of it is oral history handed down. But the reports of them, it depends on the century that you're in and on what the fashion was at the time. So you'll see paintings of them depicted, and they look very animal-like. And then you go to the next period in history, and they'll be almost soft and with flowing hair and made to look wonderful and lovely. And then, you get further to our age, and they look like these evil beasts. And then you get the other thing, Tom, where they say things like, "Oh, it had red glowing eyes, so it was the devil ape of Frodsham." So they're coming up with, trying to come up with things. They said that the archives on those kind of reports go back millennia, especially with the shucks or and I'm not talking the phantom dogs before everybody jumps on me. Actual flesh and blood, down on four legs, big, thick, muscled dogs the size of a pony. I think many of those reports in history may possibly have been our Woodwose, but that's just my theory.
And they're also on like heraldic shields and coats of arms, aren't they?
Yeah, and there are places named for them in England. So Sproughton was basically, they advertised in the penny papers because there was two wild men there. And basically they would fight amongst themselves so bad that nobody wanted to live there. So in the historic report, it says the land was offered for something like a penny, but they had to clear the wild men off it. Stainsfield's another area, the same thing, that two wild men had a fight there and the blood was spilled, and that's why it's called Stainsfield. So you have to go into like regional history as well. But yeah, they're on in the churches, aren't they, Stu? They carved into the woodwork and on fonts and things like that, the christening fonts and things. They're just all intermixed. But when the Romans came in and brought the Christianity religion, it was all pushed in the ground. It was seen as it's almost pagan and barbaric. Yeah, so we lost a lot of text then because it was all burnt. You know?
And that place I visited in Scotland last week, that's actually named Cave of the Wild Man. And it's a pretty remote area on the shores of Loch Katrine. And that's named after the Wild Man. I didn't find the cave, but, there's always next time.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. So there's actually, you said it's a region or a town named?
There's a place called Loch Katrine in the Trossachs in Scotland. Absolutely stunning spot. and it's got a few fairy legends around it, and there's an area, small area, on the shores of Loch Katrine that's called the Cave of the Wild Man.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was reading there was a legend there. There's a lot of fairy legends around Loch Katrine, and there was a minister in the 1600s, Scottish Presbyterian minister, I think he was, who was he was determined to drive the fairies out of the area. So he set about it, and they found his wife woke up in the middle of the night, and he was gone, and they found his nightshirt on the hill, and nobody ever knows what it, which was, it's an interesting story, I think.
There are 8 reports around that loch.
Yeah, there is, there are. Loch Tay and Loch Tree and stuff like that, yeah. But it's a very...
Mostly audible. Lots of howls, screams, one report of infrasound.
Mm-hmm.
What was the infrasound report? How did that go?
It was a fisherman. It was 2018. He said he was there with his friend. He's a complete skeptic. He can't understand what happened. He said, I can't put my finger on it. He's a regular outdoorsman. He's used to being in the wild. He said we were out fly fishing about 6 a.m. on the loch. It was a lovely morning, and we were thankful to get that spot. I'm just trying to get to the meat of the... They both set up. They're about 30 yards apart from each other. 1 second. Right, he said they were sat down, the fishing was trapped, so they sat down and they made a cup of tea, and they heard what was like a lion's yell. He said it lasted... We sat and observed for some time after hearing it, but nothing happened. So after about 15 minutes, it then happened again. This roar this time was much closer to us, and it was that loud that we both felt it going through our bodies. To put it in a finer way, I'm not going to repeat that, but something fell out of their trousers. And he said, we're both well-built guys, and we're not scared of anything, but we rushed back to the car and headed for the loch. And he basically felt a bit drunk and a bit swayer after hearing these growls. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other reports of loud growls or howls coming down the mountain in that area.
Well, this is what Will sometimes refers to. What is it, Will? The underwear changing moments.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's ideal. It's just mountain and valleys and salmon-stock rivers.
Yeah.
We've got a report of two upright bears. Oh, sorry, Stu. I was talking over you then. I'm sorry.
There's a massive red deer population in that area as well. It's a very, very habitable for wildlife. Very lush. Sort of got its own little microclimate. A lot of rain, so it's very green. It's a fantastic area.
There's a trend. I think there is. I saw a mini documentary just recently up in Scotland to kind of moving away a little bit from the raising sheep and letting the earth up there just kind of go back to the way it used to be. Is that, you guys have heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to rewild a lot of areas. It happens on the moors as well where I live. So we'll even have the odd burn every now and again so that the natural plants come back through. Because the sheep and the cattle have just basically grazed away the environment.
Right.
So it's a little bit, it can get really bad with mosquitoes because there aren't a lot of birds in some areas because there aren't the trees. You've got your grouse birds and your grassland birds, but there's not a whole lot of birds. There's huge areas where the sheep have even grazed everything out. So they're trying to rewild it back to what it was really and get some of the natural species back in. There is talk about putting lynx in as well, which is
Yeah, they're in. I think they've just.
Oh, you mean the lynx is in
reintroduced them in
the
Tequila.
yeah, because the deer
cats?
the deer are a pandemic. There's so many of them, they're becoming a problem now. So they're talking about putting some natural predators back into the wild to kind of keep the deer population healthy, really. I mean,
Yes.
Dick knows far more about the deer than I know.
Yeah, the deer are on the increase. I mean, it's getting parts of Scotland and parts of the New Forest. It's driving through is dangerous because they'll just, they're just there in the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of deer.
Oh, now do they? Can you hunt? I mean, do they allow hunt? Do they have hunt seasons?
Yeah. We'll have hunt seasons here, but since they changed the firearm laws in the UK, there's not as many shooters now as there used to be. It's more trophy hunting now, and certainly in Scotland, it's mostly trophy hunting. So guys will come up from all over the world to hunt the Scottish stag. Stalk them and hunt them for big money. I mean, even farmers, they can't shoot a deer on their own land unless they see it eating a crop.
Yeah. Imagine it.
Oh, okay.
Another thing that they do, Tom, and I think it might be the reason why it could be in the favour of the cryptids, is that they'll take deer out that are diseased, or if they've got too many, they'll take some of the young bucks out, and then they just dump them in one area.
Yeah.
They don't take the meat home, they just dump them off in one area.
Wait, who does this?
Like the what would you call them, Stu? Like the land...
Yeah, the landowners.
The landowners will just, if there's any sheep or, deer or anything like that, they'll just take them out and have a cull, and then they don't do anything with the meat or the skins. They just dump them in areas. So like your wildlife officers and groundskeepers and things like that, that happens all across the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's...
Okay,
yeah. Sure, that would be anything. Yeah, any of these creatures and any of the predators would consider that to be a real boon. Sure.
Yeah, it's a free meal with no calories burned getting it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. So you actually have a bit of a population issue with the deer up in, you said this was up in Scotland, northern England.
In the UK. In the UK, we have a problem with deer and boar.
Mm-hmm.
They're at unbelievable levels, and they are trashy woodland. So, but once again, you've got to be really careful if you're hunting them. We're not allowed to carry a handgun in the UK. That's completely illegal. So you're only allowed like a 2.2 rifle, really.
Okay, that's not going to work for deer hunting. So I'm just wondering, I guess where I'm going with this, I'm trying to, it sounds like maybe there's a correlation between an exploding deer population and that becoming a food supply for the creatures. Will, this is something that you've talked about in the past, isn't it, up in the state of Washington and Oregon?
Yeah, you look on the websites for the state, and they refer to the deer population as a infestation.
Yeah.
Same for
and it seems to correspond with a growth, over time, an increase in juvenile sightings of these creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got an invasive deer species in the UK called the muntjac deer. They're not native to the country, and they were brought in, and some escaped, and they've just taken off. It started off in the south of the country, and I think in about 10 years, they've travelled up to the Scottish border.
Oh, wow.
They're classed as vermin, so they've just got to be shot on sight. You know, they're classed the same as a rat or a rabbit now. There's that many of them. They're destroying, they're trashing flower beds in public parks in towns, stuff like that. You know, they've just taken off because there's no natural predators left in the UK.
They should give us our hunting rights back, because people would be able to go out and take them. They wouldn't be a problem anymore. There's many of us left that know how to still butcher a deer and use every single part of it, you know. But they've took that away from us, haven't they? We're not allowed to do that now.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you have a firearm, kind of a increased firearm restrictions. What about, going back to crossbows or bow hunting? Do they allow that for hunting of the deer? Or?
That's
no.
department.
I'm an archer myself, and we're not allowed to hunt with a bow in the UK. You can hunt with a slingshot, but you can't hunt with a bow.
Okay.
It's an ancient law that's sort of still upstands. If you're caught hunting with a bow or a crossbow, it's jail time.
Yeah.
You get
True.
which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But it's just one of those things we've got to abide by, you know.
Yeah, even fishing, it's really frowned upon. And it's one of the biggest hobbies in the UK is angling and fishing.
Yeah.
And it all belongs to the Queen. All of it belongs to the Queen.
Yeah.
Well, now the other question I have is, you said this deer population started in the how far south? Just for our listeners that.
I think it was the New Forest.
Yeah.
They escaped near the New Forest, and they sort of took hold in there, and it's just exploded. It's a pandemic now with these muntjac deer. I mean, they're just tiny little things as well, you know. They're only about the size of a cocker spaniel. Tiny little things. And there's
deer?
that. Yeah,
they're tiny. They're only little things.
Okay, interesting.
And if you surprise one, the whistle. They make like this whistle call when they're surprised, but they've just taken off, absolutely taken off, and they're classed, like I say, they're classed as vermin now, just like a rat or a rabbit. They've got to be shot on sight.
So would they be as far as, Sheffield or York or?
Way past
much further south than that. I was just having a look. It was some wonderful gentleman who owned, he was a laird, which means he was a lord, basically, and he had a lot of land. And he brought them in 1838. And that was in Bedfordshire, so like really very, very far south. And much nicer climate as well. So, but because they're so little and they breed so easily, and we would have had a decent hunting culture back then. Now we've not, and so basically it's like the big cats that people say, because they're not hunted and they're not managed. There's no wildlife managers managing them. We just become pandemic and are everywhere. Yeah, tiny little muntjacs.
Well, that is, that's extremely interesting, because this is exactly what any kind of predator, including these creatures, our topic, would need to be a requirement for food source. And I had absolutely no idea that you guys had such a huge deer, not just a population, but a problem, especially the little ones, the size of a Cocker Spaniel.
I think we have white-tailed, I'll get them wrong. Stu knows them far better than I do. Red deer.
Yeah.
And that one that I always forget. But yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 different species of deer in the UK.
We've got muntjac, roe.
That's it, yeah.
Fallow, red, and some Sitka.
Yeah.
So that's a small population of Sitka deer.
I think that's similar to the US, I think, but we don't have elk. We don't have elk or moose or anything large like that. Deer would be our biggest protein source. Mm.
But so, Stu, I just want to. It sounds like did we cover all the encounters that you've had with this creature?
With what I'd describe as Sasquatch, yeah. I had a...
You don't know what to call it, do you?
I don't want to use the word dogman, but it's the only really thing I can think of. Upright, extremely well. All I saw was the head and the shoulders peeking out behind me car, peeking out of the trees as I was driving away, and pointy ears like a German Shepherd. And like I say, that was my birthday this year at Simonside Hills. I don't even, well, it's my wife's fault. She persuaded us to go, because I will blame her. I don't
That's
like
the way it works, right? Yeah.
I don't like the Simonside Hills and Simonside Forest at all. I don't like the vibe of them. They give us the creeps. And years and years ago, I was only in me, 30 years ago, I was in my 20s, and I spent the night wild camping there with two friends, and I was uncomfortable all night to the point I stayed awake all night, keeping the fire going while my friends slept. So I tend to stay away from the place. I don't like the vibe of the place at all. It seems oppressive to me. But there's some really, on the border of the forest, there's some ancient Neolithic cup and ring markings, like carvings into stone. So I was like, oh, hey, we'll go. We'll just go through, have a look at the cup and ring markings. We'll come back. So we did that, and we're driving back along past, there's a wind farm there, wind turbines, and single track road, forest on the right, field with wind turbines on the left, and this sheep came absolutely belting out of the forest to the right, and it was going so fast it ran into the barbed wire fence, bounced off the fence, and then ran down the inside of the hedge. So I'd slammed my brakes on to stop hitting it. And when I went to pull away, I looked in the rear view mirror, and there was something leaning out of the trees. All I saw was left shoulder and head, part of the left arm, big biceps, very powerful shoulders. Like I say, big, very well-defined biceps and shoulders. I could just see the silhouette, and it had pointy ears. I would say 6.5 foot tall, and it just sort of lent the top half of its left-hand side of its body and its head out the trees, head straight up, looked at us, and then pulled back in, and I was off. I put my foot down. I was away, and I don't know what that was.
Interesting. Well, I completely relate to having a fire going all night long. Will refers to it as building a campfire that can be seen from outer space in those places. Well, real quick, Deb, I want to thank you, and Stu, I want to thank both of you for coming on. If I ever make it out there, Deb, you said periodically you and your husband have these campfires where everybody just sits around and shares stories, and I think that would just be a lot of fun.
Well, you have an open invitation. You come along and we'll make you a cup of tea and give you some cake.
There you go. All right. Well, listen, I want to thank both of you. And Deb, any final thoughts?
I just wanted to let you know about another chap that I've got in touch with. He's a witness from the northwest, so we're going to the other coast of the UK. He had an experience when he was about 14 in the woodland, and so much so that it stuck with him. He was with a friend as well. It stuck with him all these years. He's now a documentary maker. And I asked him if he would chat with you guys. He was more than happy to do it. So he's on night, so we're just going to sort of day out when it's okay for him.
Absolutely. Let us know when he's available, and we'll make the time. We'll have him on. Stu, any final words from you?
Yeah, I just want everybody to stay safe while they're out in the woods. Keep your eyes peeled, and if you're out in the woods or you're out researching and you get the vibe not to be there, then listen to your gut. Always listen to your gut.
Good advice.
Yeah, very good advice. All right. Well, listen, thank both of you, and look forward to having you on again.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Welcome back from the break, everyone. We have Norma joining us today for the Q&A. How's everyone doing this morning?
Great. Thank you.
Well, we're going to do this roundtable fashion. So, Tom, I'm going to have you start, and then we'll go to Norma, and then Brian, and we'll just kind of rotate that way.
Great. Awesome. I really enjoy these kind of roundtable Q&As. They're just very enjoyable, and I think they're very educational. Will, something that I've been thinking about, and actually this for all of us, excuse me, is, it has to do with the way Bigfoot is able to be very predictive of our behavior. And so a rhetorical question would be, what's the most effective tactic or weapon that Bigfoot can use against us? And the answer would be deception, or actually the belief that it doesn't exist. And obviously, if it doesn't exist in somebody's mind, that gives it a huge leg up on, avoidance.
And I'm not so sure that's a tactic they use. I mean, they use natural, animal behavior characteristics to keep themselves out of sight, but I think that's more of a tactic we use on ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. It's I guess a way to rephrase it would be, how is it that for the non-believers out there, the people that are maybe skeptical or just don't believe in them, I think that's how this thing has an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of particulars about the subject to sort of keep it where it is, unfortunately. But yeah, I think you're correct there. Norma, we'll go to you next.
Okay. Well, I guess a question that I get the most, and I think about a lot too, is where do you think Bigfoot makes their home? Do you think they make them in caves? Do you think that they, make these elaborate structures that people just, walk by and think is just a pile of sticks and leaves? Because I know that sometimes, people say, well, underground, they stay underground. And being underground would make a lot of sense, since the temperature under there pretty much stays the same regardless of season. So what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of anthropomorphism involved in this subject with people because they want to place human values and particulars on a non-human species. So in their minds, they see cold weather things that are very challenging for us and think they're the same for these creatures when they're not. In my experience, in fact, in just a month from now, I'll mark 48 years of involvement in this topic, and I haven't seen any evidence whatsoever of them using any kind of shelter. They don't stay in one place more than a couple weeks typically. If they do, there's other factors going on, but they don't seem to have the same needs that we do. They're just fine out in those bad weather conditions, and their primary focus is keeping fed and making little Sasquatches. So, structures that people find, and I'm hearing from hunters and Native Americans and lots of folks out there that when they're hunting, they'll oftentimes use the materials that are in a local place and carry a tarp. It's much easier to carry a tarp than a whole structure around, so they'll make these structures, they'll put the tarp over it to have a temporary shelter when they're out and about, and then they'll take the tarp and leave the structure. What's the point of tearing it down? So that's one of the reasons people find some of these things. Sometimes it's people making them. There's just lots of things that are known and unknown, so it's not something I delve too much into yet, but and of course the Sasquatches do have core areas in their home ranges, but like other wild primates, but as far as making a place where they live, like a home base, and you would see more evidence than just some kind of a structure. You're going to find areas where there's lots of, unfortunately, defecation, where there's feeding, there's things like that in a long-term place where they would live. When I worked on a couple of archaeological digs in college, that's one of the things that we would hone in on, where native folks lived, in ancient times, was their garbage pit. If you're living in one spot for a long time, you're going to have debris in a certain area. So anyway, hope I answered that question.
Yeah, that makes sense as far as like the hunters and their, making shelters and things like that. Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to mention, seeing a lot of, bones or, scat or something like that around that area. So where do you think, do they just like a temporary shelter, just like undercover?
They don't seem to really need shelter.
That's interesting.
And it's the same. You have to think in terms of like elk and deer and other animals out there too. They don't need shelter.
Right. All right.
Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I just had a follow-up on that. And really you kind of answered it with the deer and the elk and the other wildlife that don't build shelters. But also, I think we tend to think in terms of, I need a good eight hours sleep, and, the elk and the deer and the other wildlife, they take naps. Sometimes they take them standing. And I just suspect, or I wonder, what are your thoughts about these creatures not having a sleep cycle requirement like we do? In other words, they don't necessarily need to sit down and just sleep for 8 hours. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's something it's not completely unique to humans. There are other species that sleep, specified time frames like we do, but in terms of primates, that's something that's kind of unique to us. Normally, and even in our ancient history, it wasn't something that we did. You sleep a couple hours here, you're awake, you sleep, through a 24-hour cycle. It's kind of a mixed bag. So these guys are probably likely the same way. They sleep when they think they need to sleep, but they're active, they're hunting, they're doing things, throughout a 24-hour cycle. It's very different than us.
Yeah, that would make sense as far as, other animals being on alert. They can't, out in the wild, being prey especially, have to be on alert and ready. I think, and this isn't like, a prey necessarily, but I think giraffe only sleep like 4 hours maybe on a good night. Right.
Yeah, it's not all the same for all animals. So again, that's an anthropomorphic view, of putting human traits on a non-human species. So these things are a non-human species, so their characteristics are going to be very different than ours, and we can't place our traits on them because it's just not, it doesn't fit. Brian, you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, in terms of tool use, how much do you think that they use tools to attack their prey?
That's a good question. It's kind of unknown, really. Because we had the example with Randy, who witnessed one of these creatures stalk and kill an elk, or moose, I'm sorry. It was a moose. And it didn't use anything in that case. Do they in other cases? Probably. It would be rocks, whatever's in their environment that's probably handy I'm sure when they feel the need to use something else.
Yeah, I mean, is that something that they kind of like pick up as they go along, or is that something that they maybe have always intended to, pick up tools and things like that, or is it just something that they maybe kind of spontaneously happened upon?
Could be a little of both. I'm sure a lot of it is learned behavior. Other primate species, the young learn from their adults, as they're growing, the different, techniques and things that they do. But I'm sure, when they're in a situation, whatever circumstance happens to be, that, if it's easier to use a rock as opposed to, hand or arm movement, I guess depends on what they feel like at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And also, just kind of a follow up on that. How much do you think that the young ones learn from their adults? I mean, their mothers or fathers. I mean, how much do you think that they pick up on versus how much they would get in the natural world, anyways?
Well, that's kind of the nature versus nurture argument that we use with ourselves. I'm sure there's a fair amount of instinct, but a lot of it is learned behavior. It's really hard telling, how much of each, but I'm sure a great deal of it's learned behavior. Tom, we'll come over to you.
Yeah. And actually, Brian, that's a real good question on the tool use and rock throwing. It makes me wonder, we've heard so much about people that have been in the woods and all of a sudden, rocks or even pine cones or other things, sticks, are tossed at them and I'm just assuming, I think our assumption is, we haven't interviewed one of the creatures, but we assume that this is they find somebody's presence objectionable and they want to herd them out of the area. So I think it would be a natural evolution that instead of hurting them, if they wanted to actually take someone or take something out, that they could use a rock, good-sized rock, to do that.
Yeah, and we get a couple different examples of that. One of the small objects, like you talked about, sticks, pine cones, things like that, smaller materials that really wouldn't hurt a person. And then we get the softball-sized rocks that I'm sure is a much more serious attention getter. But you have to look at different kinds of behaviors we hear about, and we've interviewed people that have had a number of these different kinds of experiences. So everything from these small objects to, like with Troy, this full-blown territorial display where this thing really threw a tantrum in front of those three guys. It's very, look at it, chimps and gorillas, it's that kind of behavior is very similar. The only thing we haven't really heard about is these things throwing their feces, thankfully, because that could be an ugly situation quick.
Exactly.
Back to you, Norma.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask you, why you thought that they, threw the projectiles at people. Do you think that they would also use a projectile, rock, log, or something like that to kill prey?
Sure.
To knock a deer senseless and then, go in for the final blow?
It's possible. There are some situations like we had one here in Northern California last year. One of my contacts farther up near the Oregon border told me about a situation where he worked for a logging company, and one of the log truck drivers was heading down the road and had one of these things out in broad daylight next to the road, took this chunk of and I don't know exactly the dimensions of this piece of wood. It was apparently a small tree or part of a small tree, probably 8 feet so long and about 4 or 5 inches thick, and it threw this thing almost, he described it as pole vault style down the road at the truck. Other cases where, people have been in big trucks like that, had these creatures throwing large rocks at them, these softball-sized rocks, making a lot of damage to the truck. I think those are fairly serious intentions when they're doing things like that. There are other cases where they've had rocks. Another gentleman we talked to recently, rocks being thrown at him that weren't, because they get some pretty good accuracy with these rocks, and this gentleman, they didn't actually try to hit him. So was that an attention getter? We don't know. Probably of some way. Whatever they do in terms of throwing projectiles is intended for different reasons. And without looking at the larger picture, oftentimes we don't know what that intention is, but they're definitely trying to get the person's attention.
Right, and gorillas will do that too when they're frustrated or annoyed or want to show dominance or something like that. So
exactly.
So it could be part of, any one of those reasons.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Again, you'd have to know the context of what's going on. Oftentimes, again, we see this little window of what actually happened without the context, so we can't really say, well, this is why this was happening in this particular circumstance, so which is unfortunate.
Yeah, but that makes sense too. Okay.
Brian, you have any questions?
Oh, yeah, I was just to say, do you ever see any claw marks on trees?
I wouldn't. Well, claw marks I've seen on trees are from bear, but I have seen, and I'll give you an example. We were sent out. My friend Carlo and I got a call from a person in Skamania County back in the late 80s, and there were a number of these little cabins that people had overlooking the Columbia River, and they were the sort of thing. They weren't very elaborate. The kind of thing maybe hunters would use to, spend a few nights in, or locals who just wanted to kind of get away, and they'd go up these little, for lack of a better term, shacks, and maybe spend a weekend in. And there was this one that was built on stilts, and I don't recall exactly how high it was, but it was probably 5 feet off the ground, and they said one of these creatures was making an attempt to get into the cabin this particular night. So we went up there to investigate, and there were tracks around the cabin, and there were scratch marks 8 feet up on the side, not claw marks, but they were scratches like with big fingernails, a lot of them on the side of this wood. So occasionally you do see things like that, but it's not a common thing out in the woods anyway.
But you're saying that this thing was trying to get into the place?
It's what the people said. Now, it didn't appear to me that that's what was happening, because there wasn't any attempt on the door or anything, and there weren't any windows in it. So I'm not sure. They said they heard this thing walking around and with, a bipedal type walk, and we did find tracks that supported that, and these claw marks, or fingernail marks rather.
Yeah. But so basically, though, at the very least, though, it was curious. It was trying to see what these people were doing.
Yeah, exactly. It was probably more of an attempt to flush out the people to get an idea of how many were in there, because that plays a big role with these guys and what they're doing, like slapping on the side of a house or throwing a rock at a house, which I think sometimes is what it is. Instead of a hand slap, they're throwing something at the house. And we have other examples we know, or that was witnessed, they were throwing things at a house. And it's probably to determine how many people are in there.
You know what? That's so brilliant. I never thought, well, actually, I did think of that before, but that is so brilliant, though, too, that a lot of times when they're, like, slapping on houses, they're not necessarily just trying to intimidate the people and try to get them, but they're probably trying to make a determination as to how many people are actually in that house.
Right. It doesn't make any sense to just walk up and slap a building for no reason. These things don't do anything for no reason. There's always some factor behind their behaviors.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tom?
Yeah, real quick follow-up on that. How many times have we heard where people said, oh my gosh, it just banged the side of the house or the cabin. Went outside, nothing. No footprints, nothing. Well, it would make sense that they threw an object, a stick, a log, a rock, something at the house, and you wouldn't necessarily notice that. But you thought it slapped the side of the house or the cabin. The question I have, and this is something we've heard from time to time, and I'm just wondering how often, how frequent is this? And that is people run across deer or elk where the legs have been dismembered without the use of tools. How often have you heard this frequently? Or how often do you think we've heard this?
Well, we've heard it from time to time. It's something I think when people are out and about, especially, some of the recent photos we got of a number of these legs in a location. I think most people would just dismiss that. They'd say, oh, well, parts of a dead deer. Who wouldn't think about, oh, how many legs are here? They were broken instead of chewed. So we don't have any kind of numbers to be able to say, for any particular numbers on that case, because I think people just dismiss it. We used to do it too. I mean, we'd find parts of deer, and you find deer parts out in the wild occasionally. So unless something stands out as being very unusual, you just kind of look at it and say, oh, dead deer, and off you go. You don't think about it anymore. But now some of the pictures we have now definitely raise those questions. I think it happens more than we think it does.
Yeah, I think we're right. There's a guest on that was, I think she was on a couple of years ago, had a elk that her and her dad were taking care of, and one of the legs were snapped off. And we had a gentleman in Texas who actually witnessed this.
Yeah, and it does happen. I think that's one of the methods they use. They disabled, like in his case especially, the group of creatures were hunting these number of deer. I don't remember how many he said there was, but there were a group of them. And they would simply, one of the creatures disabled the deer by breaking its legs in front of him and leaving it, and then coming back for it after they, got more of them. And I think, who knows, ancient man may have hunted very similar ways. You try to maximize the hunt. You don't need to necessarily kill something on the spot, but something as big as these creatures would simply disable it, get more of them, or as many as they can in that particular event, and then come back and clean up, basically.
Yeah, good point. And I think it's also a good point for people in the woods, hunters, etc., to, when you see a kill or you see a carcass, maybe just be a little bit observant, and if you see dismembered limbs, or does it look like they were cut, gnawed, or just snapped?
And in the case of the lady you mentioned that we talked to in Southern Oregon, in those pictures, it was interesting to note, from hunting, at least in my experience, with my dad and uncles, they wouldn't bother removing the lower legs until they got the rest of the animal home. They would gut them, and sometimes they would skin them on the location, but oftentimes they would just gut them and maybe quarter them, for elk. Deer, they would just gut them and then bring them home, and then they would finish, skinning and cutting off the lower unusable parts of the legs. In that picture, there isn't much left of the animal aside from the guts, but the legs were broken off and they were fresh. I mean, that all happened within like a 30-minute time frame. So that's one of the examples. Some of the pictures we have of deer legs are bones, but this one's fresh with the elk.
Yeah, the time frame is real important too, because Will, you've hunted and I've hunted. I've never skinned an elk, but I've skinned deer. Prepped them out in the field. It takes a while.
It does,
even if you're good at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, typically you're not just going to saw the legs off right there. And with that elk, they weren't sawed; they were snapped off.
Yeah, good luck with that. That's like taking a 4x4 and snapping it. Good luck with that
Sometimes
as well.
it's tough enough to saw the legs off at the joints.
Right?
Norma?
Yeah, that's incredible. That's the crazy strength that they have. I was wondering what you thought about Sasquatch and the family unit. Are they more like? Do you think they're more like gibbons are monogamous, or do you think they're more like like gorillas that have maybe 3 or 4 females and that's it, or do you think that it's anything goes?
Well, that's a tough question. It's something we don't know a lot about. I know the group that I followed around for a dozen years in Skamania County and that region, around the county. It seemed to be a male and a female and 2 younger ones at that time. There were 3 rogue males in another group not far from them. And I do know that occasionally 1 or more of those males would link up with that group for whatever time frame, and then they would go back on their own. Whether that was, and I'm guessing it probably was for breeding purposes. So, were there more females in the area? I don't know. That was just, tracking that group around. I only found evidence of those individuals, but there could have been more in the region. East of there's another population. I don't know about the intergroup dynamics there. There was just not enough time to really spend in that region, tracking them and figuring that out. So how that works, I don't know.
Do you think that the breeding, or I think it's gorillas that they don't have an offspring for like 4 years after a previous one? Do you think that because the population of Bigfoot is so much less, or is it so much less because of that reason?
Well, they don't seem to be cranking young ones out, at least in the past. Now, in the past few years, we've had a real rise in the number of juveniles out there. So, food's going to govern that. When they have a lot more food, the population's going to grow, which is what we're seeing. But in terms of, how often they have young ones, it doesn't appear that they have a lot. And in other words, they're not breeding every year.
Right. So that would go along the lines of like the gorillas.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Brian?
Yeah, so Will, on this note, just out of curiosity, because I actually, in the last couple of weeks, I read a couple of different things about this. But with Patty, do you think that, first of all, was she possibly pregnant? And then also, do you think that she was basically kind of covering up and trying to protect some females that might have been in the area, or her children, I should say, not females, but I mean her children that might have been in the area?
Well, on the first question, there's no way of knowing if that creature was pregnant. Didn't appear to be, so there's no way of knowing. Secondly, there were tracks of 3 individuals in the area. There weren't any signs of young ones. There were 3 adults. In fact, that creature in the film was the smallest of the 3 of the sets of tracks. So it was felt by the people involved at the time that the other 2 were probably males. Tom?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so that's interesting. I mean, because there's so much, evidence out there, or so many like different questions out there, I should say, that I guess we really don't know. I mean, it's great that Patterson got the film, but there's still so many questions that we don't know, because there were tracks of them going off into different areas that unfortunately Patterson never was able to get.
Well, Bob Gimlin told me at that particular day, because I asked him, once years ago. I said, why didn't you guys follow the creature? And he said, we were afraid of where the other two were. We didn't know. So Bob Titmus followed the creature's tracks 10 days later. I can't remember how far, but went to where the creature apparently was, had concealed itself where it could watch them for a time. They didn't see tracks of the other two, but the other two had to be in the area somewhere. But they didn't do a great search of the area either. So, and in the face of not having a lot of information about that, of course, people make up crackpot theories. So, we just stick to what we know and not delve too much into speculation. We can speculate some based on what's known, but some people go way off the deep end, and it's really a disservice to the subject as a whole.
Yeah. And but what we do know, though, is that probably those creatures were watching Pedersen and Gimlin before that they even knew that they were watching them, right?
Well, they were in the area for a month.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they were well aware that they were there.
Yeah.
And the creatures had been there, at that point when the film was taken for at least 2 months, which is unusual because typically they don't stay in an area that long.
Mm-hmm.
Tom?
Yeah. I'm talking about things we do know and things we don't know. Didn't Donald Rumsfeld comment on that? He says there's things that we know and things that we know that we don't know, and then there's known knowns and known unknowns. But it's the unknown unknowns. Or is he talking about something else?
I'm already confused.
You remember that famous quote, though?
Yeah, vaguely.
Oh, boy. Know. Anyway, speaking of the known unknowns, talking about the one of the fascinating creatures for me are the type 4s, because they're totally unlike type 1s, 2s, and certainly the type 3s. If we were to speculate, do you think possibly those are actually really not at all related to the type 1s or type 2s, but an entirely different species, if you will, perhaps, really Neanderthal or some other relic hominid that we thought was gone but isn't?
Well, you and I have talked about this recently a number of times, and it is interesting. It could very well be something entirely different, just because it's like the Minnesota Iceman, for example, is one of these types, and that's the region of the continent that they seem to habitate in, these type 4s, and they are unlike, the normal quote-unquote Sasquatch. So in terms of size and description, they're more, when people see them, they say they're more what you would call, and they use the term caveman, where the Sasquatch is very different. The stature isn't as big. In fact, the Minnesota Iceman would have been around 6 feet tall, no hair on the face. Now, just because something is hair covered doesn't mean it's a Sasquatch necessarily. Could be entirely different species, and could they be a remnant of Neanderthals? Well, we don't know. Could it be? Sure. Well, there's just no way of knowing.
Yeah, I just find that particular species, the type 4s, really fascinating. I read one of your books where you're talking about the hands and the feet, and I think the term that you used was spatulated, so they're really exaggerated.
And that's what Bernard Heuvelmans, who was a scientist, and Ivan Sanderson, the two of them were sent by the Smithsonian to actually do a study of what Hansen had in the ice. And obviously it's limited because something is frozen in a block of ice, but they were able to see enough of it, and you can find, their reports online as to what they said about it. And people say, I know people listening will say, oh, well, it was proven fake. Well, it wasn't proven fake. There was a second one, a copy made that was put in ice, and the original one disappeared. And there are a number of rumors about where that ended up and who had it. But, the second one was a fake, but the original one was not. So, and there were 3 of the creatures, Hansen said when he shot the one. So that story is also out there. I put it in my book, The Minnesota Iceman. So, again, it's one of those situations lots of people speculate about, and because there's so much information floating around, some of it disinformation, that it keeps people confused. But back to the original, question, could it be something different? I think it's something different. It's not a Sasquatch. Norma?
Yeah, I was wondering, and I get this question a lot. Why can't we find a body? And I don't know how many times I'm asked that question. Why can't we find one? If there's Bigfoot out there, why can't we find a dead one in the woods? How do you answer that question?
Well, the first part is easy. People like to ignore what's been put out in the past. And if people have that question, go get copies of John Green's first 3 books, on the Track of the Sasquatch, Year of the Sasquatch, and the Sasquatch File, because they list in there dozens of cases where bodies have been found. And they talk in there about what happened to those. Creatures like Jacko, a young one that was captured, I want to say 1882, I think that's when the article date is, in British Columbia. They had the creature in a cage for, I don't remember how long, I don't know if it specified how long, and they were going to take it to England to show it. And apparently the creature died en route, and of course, in those times, they would just throw, people or whatever that died overboard. It wasn't something you keep on the ship because of health reasons. They didn't really know what they had, so it wasn't that big a deal. We think it's a big deal today, but back then it wouldn't have been as big a deal. So, and then typically they're not just dumb animals. That, on occasion, maybe when others, like there was one, and I can't think of the name. Sorry, I'm prepared with what details off the top of my head, but it was in Northern California in the 60s, early 60s, where a couple of young girls found a dead one on a logging road, partially decomposed. And of course, they didn't say anything about what they found, and it would have decomposed, years later by the time Green had a chance to go there and look the area over. But typically, you don't find a body because they're not dumb animals. They don't just wander around and then keel over somewhere. Other members of the groups probably either bury or maybe even they consume the dead ones. We don't know. But they're not just leaving them lying around.
Okay.
And even if they did, you're talking a needle in a haystack. A lot of times creatures know when they're going to die, and they'll go off and hide, making finding something very difficult.
Right. And they usually, I've seen a video where they show a whole deer, and it decomposes and animals come and get it and scatter their bones and things like that within a very short period of time.
Very quickly, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously nature takes care of stuff like that. So that would make sense as well. And if they're in a family unit, then that would make sense that they would come and take that body as well and, bury it or do whatever, they think. And that was another thing I was thinking about is that, would they consume it? Being, what do you call it? Like, it's easy dinner.
It is. I mean, it sounds kind of gruesome, but, again, we can't anthropomorphize by placing our values on a non-human species. So do they do that? It's certainly possible, sure. There are stories of people who claim they witnessed, a number of the creatures, burying a dead one. That's certainly a possibility. I mean, we just don't know.
Right, yeah. Alrighty.
Brian?
Oh, hey, no, hey, Will, I was just going to ask, are you talking about the Foothill teenagers that saw that? Is that what you're referring to, or
about people witnessing?
Yeah, like the foothill.
I can't remember the exact. There was one particular account, and I want to say
Yeah,
it was an old one. Way back
yeah,
around the turn of the 20th century time frame.
yeah. Oh, okay, okay. No, no. I'm talking about like 1961 or there was like one case where
Could be
yeah,
one. Yeah, there could be one during that time period too. There were
yeah,
several of them.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, like just out of curiosity, like do you think that in the future people are going to be more likely to come forward if they have an experience, or is this going to be kind of like a thing where everybody's just going to be completely in lockdown, if you will,
No,
where nobody.
people are definitely. I mean, it's increasing because it's more acceptable to be able to tell, something you've experienced, and I encourage people to do it. Um, I don't know. Be careful who you tell things to because there are a lot of people who will change stories and exploit, witnesses, things
Yeah,
like that. Unfortunately, that does happen. So, um, and what we do is we keep people anonymous. I don't want people's
yeah,
lives interfered with by people out there who are just after their own gain, which is, again, what happens. And I've worked very hard for years to protect people that way as much as I can anyway. Um,
yeah. No, no, that's such a great point. In fact, anybody that's listening, I mean, always keep in mind that we will definitely protect your anonym, like your your
your
confidence.
anonymity, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, like we're not never going to use that against you or anything like that.
Well,
So your
the important,
anonymity and yeah,
yeah, the importance of people telling their accounts comes in what other people get from it, the people who've experienced things.
exactly.
And I
Hmm.
can't tell you how many times I've had people contact me and say, I thought I was crazy until I heard this person talk and they experienced exactly what I experienced. So it makes me feel like I'm not alone and I'm not crazy. And I think
Yeah,
that's the true value of people relating their experiences. And it's not important for other people to know who they are or where they are or anything. It's just the particulars of that experience because it helps other people who've had similar things happen.
exactly, exactly. Because, like you said, yeah, a lot of people have where they might listen to our show and they understand exactly what the person is talking about, but maybe they're not necessarily confident to come on. But that's fine. Again, we'll protect your identity and everything and so forth. And so it's just so important though that we get so many like incredible stories from people to come out and just be honest and just tell us what you are, even if you want to be anonymous. We'll protect your identity.
Encountering one of these things is an absolute life-changing experience, and I can't articulate it enough. The people who've had this experience know what I'm talking about, and those who haven't, it can't relate to it. Unfortunately, not to the level that a person that feels it. I mean, I can't even articulate it, having experienced it myself a couple of times. So um, it just completely alters your worldview after you've experienced one of these things.
Yeah, and also, well, I will just tell you too that some of the people that we have come on here, they will say afterwards, it's just such a relief to be able to tell their experience and to be able to share their experience with everybody else. And it's just, it's like night and day between the time they come on the show or the first time that they're thinking about coming on the show and then they come after the show and they say that it's like night and day. It's like a huge relief. Uh,
It's a big weight to take off your shoulders. It really is.
yeah.
Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of people, and I got to say that was kind of my experience too when I first talked to you, Will, a number of years ago. I want to back up a little bit about the bodies and that sort of thing. Well, you had talked about some time ago and I think it's in the state of Washington, that there were some mounds that you had discovered or you were aware of, and you asked the one of the Native American elders or leaders up there about them because it was in their area, and their response was pretty interesting. They said, "Those aren't ours. We didn't make those."
Well, there something Renee DeHinden put me on many years ago was, and it was something in one of John Green's books. It was a small, I want to say it was just one page. The story, there was a logger, and coincidentally the same year that Patterson got the film, 1967 in the fall also, saw 3 creatures while he was waiting to do work this particular morning. He said it was a male, a female, and a very young juvenile, stacking and piling rocks, and they dug a hole, and then they saw him and took off. But so DeHinden went and started researching this, and Green didn't put much of a picture. He put his son standing in the hole, and you couldn't tell there was a hole or anything in the picture. But so I asked him about it, and he says, well, he took me to one of the locations, and he told me how to find a number of other of these places, in Washington and Oregon. And since I've learned all the way into northern Canada, these things exist. The purpose of rocks and piles, or the stacks and piles of rocks, we don't fully know. DeHinden didn't know, and he and I talked about it. I photographed, I think at that time, 9 different sites on the coast. And they're not places you can just walk to or drive to. You have to actually get out cross country and search for these things. Are very difficult to locate. But we did take there was the old timer Davis Perry. One of the few times he actually took me to a place where there was something very interesting to find. He had found these piles of rock. And I did ask some of the local native folks that I knew, and that was their response, that they said they're not ours. And they just sort of give me that look like, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I would love to someday explore those mounds. Not necessarily dig them up, but GPR would be kind of a interesting tactic to see what's underneath them.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Carlo and I went there, and it was comical to me to look back on it now. Because I'd been trained and actually worked on a couple of digs in archaeology, and that budding archaeologist wanted to dig up one of those mounds, and I tried to see what was there. And then the mounds were probably, I don't remember how far across the base they were, but they were about 5 feet high, and the rocks were probably football size or maybe a little larger. And I have several pictures, and they're in one of my books of these. And my friend Carlo, he was kind of a sociology background, and we were both so focused on what we were doing, we weren't paying attention to each other. Or he was paying more attention than I was, but I was removing the rocks. And as I was doing so, he put rocks back into the place. And I kept thinking after a while, how come I'm not making any progress here? Until I focused on what he was doing. And he says, well, if these are Native American, I don't think we should disturb them. And he was right. And then later, of course, I found out they weren't from the native folks in the region. So, it would be interesting to go back, I guess. I don't know what, if anything, could be found. Our anthropologist or forensic anthropologist, John, and I discussed that, and he says, well, depending on the age, and they were moss covered, a lot of these piles, so they were fairly old. He said there probably wouldn't be anything left intact under them. And he's probably correct, because of they're porous, insects, a lot of microbes would break that stuff down, and then with seasonal weathering, that's oxidization and such would take its toll pretty fast on bones. So, but we could at some point, I suppose, find something under one of those piles somewhere in one of these sites. of the more than a dozen that I know of currently. But we'll see. That remains in the future. Norma?
I was wondering what you thought about where the Sasquatch is descended from.
Oh,
Some people
good question.
Yeah, some people think that they're descended from Gigantopithecus.
No.
And it, others might, think something else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what they say about opinions. I could say what an old first sergeant of mine told me, but it's, we have kids listening, so I don't want to use that terminology.
Giganto is...
That was a large ground-dwelling ape. The Sasquatch is not an ape, and for people out there who believe that, they're not. You can look at the feet and hands, etc., the morphology, and they're not ape. They're hominid, and that's my opinion. Of course, again, we know about opinions, so but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be proven correct down the road. That being said, they would not descend from Gigantopithecus. What's important about the Gigantopithecus is it demonstrates that something like the Sasquatch certainly can exist, because that creature did exist, and it was actually larger than the North American Sasquatch. So, if you have something that's, in the anthropological fossil record that did exist, then why is it so difficult to believe that these creatures exist?
Yeah.
There was a lot of species that did exist that, we're just now finding out that there were at least 7 different types of hominids, different hominid species that existed at the same time. We like to think that we're the only one, because I know people would say, well, we can prove we're the only ones. We don't have any proof of the others. Well, now there are proof of some of these other species. We're just not at the end of the road yet where we can prove that these creatures actually are out there, at least to their satisfaction.
Yeah, some of us can.
Well, this is true. There are those of us that have seen the things that know they're out there, and some of the people who say they aren't, it's not important to me what they say. And to other people who've seen the creatures, their opinions aren't important.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to who do you listen more to? People who actually saw something, or people who are just coming up with ideas and saying that they aren't? Which carries more weight?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Brian? Did we lose Brian? Are you still there?
Nope.
Oh, there he is.
No, I'm sorry. No, I think you're absolutely right. It's totally bizarre to think like what has happened with the subject, but at the same time, we have to be open-minded, and I guess we just never know what is going to be out there. And in fact, we do have a lot of fake people out there, unfortunately, that that will put up fake evidence and so forth. So we just always have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, though, there are so many good people, though, that do such a great job in terms of protecting this subject and to providing a lot of information about this subject. So
yeah, that's correct. I wanted to mention something you talked about. I don't necessarily hoaxing, but there are people out there who, and this is a recent one I saw on Facebook. Facebook is kind of in a way, it's kind of a toilet. There's lots of crap there. But I keep an eye sometimes just to see what's going on. There were some people recently pushing this thing about, there was, the story was put out on one site, and show that this face, it shows this face is supposedly taken at night of a Sasquatch, and the story was that some biologist was just kind of turning around taking pictures in the dark and got this, and it's kind of a crazy story. One of the better sites on Facebook is called Bigfoot Hoaxers 2.0, and there's a lot of good folks out there, not necessarily naysayers on the subject. They just they want the truth. So when this story came up, they posted the information, and what it was this face was actually a piece of artwork. And the artist himself actually did the write-up about what this was, and the picture was taken as a promotional piece to help sell the artwork. So he put it in this particular setting, they took the picture, and it was the same with this other photograph of what's the same face looking in a window. People are saying, oh, and people who don't know the topic just immediately, their gut response is, oh, that's real, and it's not. It was a piece of artwork, not done as a hoax, but there are people out there who are proposing this as a real face, and I think it's a disservice to people who have actually had these encounters, have seen these things and had this traumatic experience. When people out there who don't know the subject, or they're trying to promote themselves or their YouTube channel or Facebook page or whatever they're doing, their own name, by making these insane claims on something that was simply a piece of artwork.
Right, exactly, Will. And that also leads me to another point about this whole subject, which is that the majority of people that are out there that have had experiences, they're not looking for money. They're not looking for recognition. But of course, you do see on, a lot of times like these like Facebook pages and these YouTube pages where people are looking for money. But no, actually, the majority of people that are honestly talking about their experiences are not looking for money. They're on sites like ours, and they're just talking about their experiences, and it's a totally different experience than some of these other like YouTube pages and things like that.
Yeah, you're correct. I get a lot of information. In fact, there was a gentleman we were trying to get on the show recently, and who declined because of his position. And that's a real concern. If a person is a professional, or just their job could be in jeopardy because of what they would say, and maybe just their voice would be recognized. And I've had quite a few people, articulate that to me, which is no problem. I try to help them out, with what information I can to help them work through their experience. But, that's the big red flag to me. If somebody's got a picture that's supposed to be real, and the first place they go to is Facebook or YouTube, that's a huge red flag, because 99% of the people I come across who've experienced something, they don't want any attention whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Tom?
I agree with that. It's because it's a trauma, and they don't want to, I don't know if it's not wanting to re-traumatize themselves, but yeah, they don't. It's a different psychological mindset with the people that are trying to get attention to themselves versus the authentic encounters.
It sort of goes back to that question, if you encounter something, how come you didn't reach in your pocket and get the phone out to take a picture of it? A good friend of ours, had rocks thrown at him recently, had an experience, and he understands the same thing. We talked to him, and he says, the very last thing in your mind is anything other than surviving the moment. You're not thinking about taking a phone out of your pocket and saying, oh, hello, stand there, say cheese. That is not in your mind. It's such a psychological traumatic event that you're not thinking about things like that whatsoever.
That's exactly right. And the other thing is, you're surviving the moment. Also, the person who's asking, well, why didn't you take a picture? Really, what they're saying is, excuse me, why didn't you take a picture for me?
Exactly. And it has nothing to do, if I have, and I have had the creature standing in front of me, I don't need to prove that to anybody else. I could care less what anybody else thinks. I know what I saw and experienced.
Right. And oftentimes when people are asking the question, well, gee, why didn't you take a picture? They're saying, why don't you just prove that it exists? And I go back to that phrase that I say sometimes is I got 2 words for them. They're not thank you, go away. And here's the other thing. Talking about photographs won't do a thing.
No.
They really won't.
Renee DeHinden told me you could have 1,000 pictures, and as long as one person says it's fake, it doesn't do anything for anyone.
That's exactly right. I did have a question, I just want to kind of back up.
Sure.
I'm going to go a whole different direction here. You've talked about in the past methods of like a deterrent, and one of them that I found really interesting is smoking.
Yes.
Or maybe even vaping. It freaks them out. Can you comment on that?
Well, this was something I was told from one of my sources, was that for whatever reason, if they see a human, with smoke or some sort of vapor coming out of their mouth and nostrils, it totally freaks them out.
Really? I didn't know that.
That's what I was told.
Safety tip, folks.
Safety tip, absolutely. You don't need to inhale it, but if it's coming out of your mouth and nose, it wigs them out.
Wow. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Well, listen, everyone, we're running short on time. We'll go around for each one of you and, question or thoughts. Norma, we'll start with you.
What would you do if you found one?
Alive or dead?
Either way, we're talking about how people, want to become famous, want to, make their mark or whatever in monetarily. But if it were me, I guess, I would contact the people that I trusted the most and actually probably want to get this species, accredited, I guess. Not necessarily, go across the country with this thing in a box,
Right.
I wouldn't be looking for that. And if I ever had an opportunity to, like Diana Fossey and Jane Goodall, to watch these creatures and to, study them and, put some real, good meat in the subject, I would absolutely do something like that. And somebody asked me one time, what would you do if you found it? And I honestly, at the time, I was like, I don't honestly know what I would do, other than I would reach out to people who I honestly trusted, who wouldn't, take it to the 9th degree, in video, you know what I'm saying?
Right, exploit it.
I wouldn't do something like that. What are your feelings on something?
Well, that's a good point. For me, long-term observation is something I would do. And of course I have a plan. I'm not going to go into too much detail because there's a lot to it, but if it were a remains, I have quite a number of scientists already standing by in confidential mode that would, do the proper study on it and get that into the hands of science. But for me personally, if I were able to do long-term study, that's what I would do. Brian?
Okay, so just last minute question. Swimming. You've said before that they don't necessarily go out there to swim, but they can do it. Just out of curiosity, what is your take on how often these creatures swim?
Oh no, I've said they're very good swimmers. It's well documented. You can go again into Green's books and some old reports many times. They're not afraid of water. I have a friend, Rob Alley in Alaska, who wrote Raincoat Sasquatch. He's got plenty of stories of them in water. I had a place on the Columbia River, 2 small towns east of Camas and Washougal, where the creatures were seen by locals swimming the Columbia River often. over many years. So, yeah, no, they're very, very good swimmers. Tom?
All right. Hey, I want to thank our special guest today, Norma. Thanks, Norma. You had some really excellent questions.
Thank you.
And yeah, absolutely. Also, I want to just, yes, we're going to have you on again. You always have some really good insights. For our listeners out there, I want to just encourage you, if you really like the show and you want to get the updates, be sure and click the subscribe button, click the bell so that you get the latest updates from us, and smash the like button. We'd like to hear from you.
All right, everyone. That'll conclude this segment. Stay tuned for the third segment of the show. We are waiting for more new stories to come in. So we have a new reader, so we're waiting on those, but we'll keep using the ones we have. I hope everyone enjoys those. So, everyone, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next segment.
Welcome. This story is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. For more than a century, people have been saying that a huge, hairy, primitive human roams the unmapped mountains of the Northwest. Here is the first tangible evidence that Bigfoot or Sasquatch really exists. The first photos of Bigfoot, California's legendary abominable snowman, by Ivan T. Sanderson. Sanderson was heavily credentialed. Listen for his bio at the end of this story. At 3:30 p.m. on the 20th of October last year, two young men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, were packing it on horseback into one of the last remaining great wilderness areas, northeast of Eureka, California. Their saddlebags contained on one side rifles and grub, and on the other ready-loaded movie and still cameras and other equipment. They were following a creek which had been washed out 2 years ago in the terrible floods that devastated most of Northern California. This was some 20 miles beyond the end of an access road for logging and about 35 miles in from the nearest and only blacktop road in this vast and yet not fully mapped area of national forest. I have been up this bluff creek, and as a botanist I can tell you that it is rugged. 4 layers of tiers of trees that the tallest is up to 200 feet, and dense undergrowth. Also, the terrain goes up and down a gigantic sawtooth. Roger and Bob rounded a sharp bend in the sandy arroyo of the creek. Then it happened. The horses reared suddenly in alarm and threw both riders. Luckily, Roger fell off to the right and, being an experienced horseman, disengaged himself and grabbed his camera. Why? Because he had spotted what had turned their horses into mad broncos. At about 100 feet ahead, and on the other side of the creek bed, there was a huge, hairy creature that walked like a man. The way Roger described it to me would not, I am afraid, make much sense to you, but then Roger had been hunting this sort of creature for many years. What he actually said was, "Gosh darn it, Ivan, right there was a Bigfoot. And for pity's sake, she was a female. Just wait till you see the film." Roger is a Northwesterner, and he does not waste words, but what he does say, I listen to. This is what he told me. On the other side of the creek, back up against the trees, there was a sort of man creature that we estimated later, by measuring some logs that appear in the film, to have been about 7 feet tall. Both Bob and I estimate, and this pretty well matched what others told us from the examination of the depth to which her track sank into the hard sand, that she would weigh about 350 pounds. She was covered with short, shiny black hair, even her big, droopy breasts. She seemed to have a sort of peak on the back of her head, but whether this was longer hair or not, I don't know. Anyhow, hair came right down her forehead to meet her eyebrows, if she had any, and it came right up to her just under her cheekbones. Oh, and get this, she had no neck. What I mean is The bottom of her head just seemed to broaden out onto and into her wide muscular shoulders. I don't think you'll see it in the film, but she walked like a big man in no hurry, and the soles of her feet were definitely light in color. This last bit got me, as I have seen really black-skinned Melanesians with pale pink palms and soles. I don't want to sound facetious, but this whole thing gets hairier and hairier, as you will see in a moment. Roger did something then that I have never known any professional photographers to do. Even if his camera was loaded with the right film, he had the cap lens off, the thing was set to the right f-stop, and so on. He started running, hand-holding his Kodak 16mm loaded with Kodachrome film, trying to focus on this creature. What he got was just about what any amateur would get in such circumstances, but then he got a real break. As Roger put it, she was just swinging along as the first part of my film shows, but all of a sudden, she just stopped dead and looked around at me. She wasn't scared a bit. Fact is, I don't think she was scared of me, and the only thing I can think of is that the clicking of my camera was new to her. "Okay," I said. "Tell me this, Roger. The hunting season was on, wasn't it?" "You're darn shooting right it was," Bob Gimlin chimed in. "And out that way, anything moving with fur on it is liable to get shot. But actually, there just aren't any hunters way up there. 20 miles beyond the only road known as the Bluff Creek access, could it be that Mrs. Bigfoot knew all about guns but was puzzled by the whirring of a small movie camera? And another thing, everybody who says they have been close to one of these creatures or has found one of their beds has stressed the ghastly, nauseating stink they exude and leave behind. Was this what really scared the horses, or did the horses scare the adorable woodsman, which is my name for the lady? While we referred to this in the title as the Abominable Snowman for purposes of quick identification, the Bigfoot or Sasquatch, zoologically, has nothing to do with the Himalayan abominable snowman known for centuries in Asia, and first brought to the attention of the Western world in 1921. Our Lady is a form of primitive, full-furred human. The Yeti, or abominable snowman of the Himalayas, is some sort of giant rock-climbing ape, in my opinion, and that of Professor Carlton S. Kuhn. The Yeti footprints found have an opposed big toe, almost like a hand. The Bigfoot has an unopposed toe, such as is seen only on human-type creatures. While Roger took the film, Bob got the horses calmed down and then rode over the creek. Roger was running again after the Bigfoot, still hand-holding his movie camera. Despite the logs and trash on the route that she took, and it was not even a game trail, he got sortie parting shots which turned out to be of particular interest to the scientists. But we will come to that later. At that point, I asked Bob, because he was then what is called the backup man, which means that he was now close enough to see Roger clearly, just what was Roger doing? Well, he was running like hell, jumping them logs and going up into the real thick bush. Did you see her too? Yeah, Ivan, but way ahead and really taken off for the hills. This brought me up sharp, because I had by that time viewed their film, and half a dozen of the takeouts blown up in full color as transparencies, which I had examined under strong magnifying lenses on an illuminated shadow box several times, and projected by 3 different projectors. In every case, the creature was at standard speed for photogs, 24 frames per second. As Roger said, at first the thing just ambling along, swinging her rather long arms, not running scared, and even stopping for a brief look-see over her shoulder, as it were, then ambling on again into the deep woods. Yet here was the backup man saying that she had taken off for the hills. Roger, however, backed up his backup man unprompted. Yeah, when she got around the corner and into the real heavy stuff, the timber and underbrush, she did take off, running, I mean, because when we lost her tracks on the pine needles after tracking her for about 3.5 miles, we took plaster casts of her tracks. Now, down by the creek, in the sand, where we first spotted her, her stride was from 40 to 42 inches from the back of the heel to the left side to the back of the right heel ahead. But When she got really going, she left tracks that measured 65 inches from back heel to back heel. Man, she was running just like you and I do. Why she? I asked Roger. Well, Ivan, let's run that film through again, and you tell me, as a trained zoologist, if that thing has pendulous breasts or not. Well, we ran the film again, slowly, and we had a stop and hold device on the projector by which we can hold any frame without fear of burning it. This we did, and so help me, there are definitely large pendant breasts fully covered with short black hair. No ape or monkey is known to have any such development of the female mammary glands. Human beings, on the other hand, do, frequently. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin actually had nothing much more to add. They presented us, both newsmen and scientists, with this film for appraisal. We viewed it, and our findings follow. But for my money, these young men, after 6 years of sensible effort, have turned up with the first bit of possibly concrete evidence for something that, however fantastic it may sound, has been going on for years, both in this country and Canada, and a lot of other places in the world, like Russia, for instance. So let me get down to a proper analysis from both a scientific and a journalistic point of view. Before I do this, however, I want to say that in this day of technology, anything can be a hoax. But elaborate hoaxes cost a lot of money, and if they are to fool scientists and the like, they also require plenty of knowledge. Anyway, here's what we did to verify and check it out. I've known Roger Patterson by correspondence for about 6 years, he tells me, and this flatters the hell out of me that he got interested in this business from reading a book that I published in 1961, entitled Snowmen, Legend Come to Life, which was a compendium of all that I had been able to find in published form on this subject up to that date. I, myself, have been researching it since 1930. During this work, I found that the British had first become cognizant of the matter in Asia in 1921, and quite by mistake. However, as I went back in history, I discovered that just such hairy, primitive, non-tribalized, human-like creatures have been reported by scholars of various cultures and in literature for centuries from almost all over the world. Thus, what Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin achieved is not just an isolated incident. It fits a pattern, and precisely. But what happened next? Well, these young men had the sense to get their film carefully processed, under guard, a copy made, and the original locked up in a vault so that it could not be scratched, stolen, or destroyed. Then they went to the one group of people who really know about faking things, especially like King Kong, ape men, and other phony monsters, namely Universal Pictures and Hollywood. There they met Dale Sheets, head of the documentary film department, and top technicians in what is called the special effects department, who are the men who have actually made such things for the movies. They asked the technicians, in effect, "Look at this strip of film, fellows, and then tell us if you could produce that for us." "No," the experts answered. "Maybe if you allotted a couple of $1,000,000 we could try, but we'd have to invent a whole new set of artificial muscles, get a gorilla skin, and train an actor to walk like that. It might be done, but offhand, we'd say it would be nearly impossible." So then, Bob and Roger applied to various groups of American scientists out west. None were seriously interested. There were, however, 2 Canadians who had also been looking into this matter in their country, where the creatures have been named Sasquatches. These Canadians, Mr. John Green, a newspaper publisher of Harrison Lakes, British Columbia, and René de Hinden, originally a Swiss mountaineer, but for the past 2 decades a government forestry officer for the Canadian government, flew down to Yakima, Washington, and invited Roger, Bob, and Roger's brother-in-law, Al de Atley, to come up to British Columbia and give a group of scientists there a showing. They did, in Vancouver. At this meeting, there were, in addition to Dr. Ian McTaggart Cowan, Dean of Graduate Studies at the University of British Columbia, who is the province's leading zoologist, a dozen or so scientists, including Don Abbott, an anthropologist with the Provincial Museum in Victoria. Most of the scientists admitted in print that, though they had come to the meeting skeptics, they had left somewhat shaken. Here's how they stated their reactions to the Vancouver province next day. Dr. McTaggart Cowan summed up the more cautious opinions when he said, "The more a thing deviates from the known, the better the proof of its existence must be." Don Abbott spoke for the dozen or so scientists who appeared remarkably close to being convinced. "It is about as hard to believe the film is faked as it is to admit that such a creature really lives. If there's a chance to follow up scientifically, my curiosity is built to the point where I'd want to go along with it. Like most scientists, however, I am not ready to put my reputation on the line until something concrete shows up, something like bones or a skull." Frank Beebe, well-known Vancouver naturalist and provincial museum illustrator, commented, "I'm not convinced, but I think the film is genuine. And if I were out in the mountains and I saw a thing like this one, I wouldn't shoot it. I'd be too afraid of how human it would look under the fur." From a scientific standpoint, one of the hardest facts to go against is that there is no evidence anywhere in the Western Hemisphere of primate, ape, monkey, evolution, and the creature in the film is definitely a primate. Beebe's objection, however, was typical of those given by other experts who ventured out of their own specialties to comment. "Since I know something about primates and about geography, I brought this matter to the attention of Dr. Joseph T. Raitt, who happens to be the chief geographer of the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. His statement appears in detail elsewhere in this magazine, but I may sum it up here by saying that the distinguished Dr. Raitt, whose doctorate, by the way, is in human ecology, responded in effect bunk to this last objection. One leading American weekly appeared to have been sufficiently impressed by the film to fly Roger, Bob, and Al with their film and outtakes from the same blown up to New York to hear their story straight. Armed with the film and these statements, the three landed in New York and gave me a buzz. I was with them in 2 hours, and then the jazz began. Every time we called upon anybody, we were asked for further confirmation. It was not easy, but we got it, step by step. But after a week of spending other people's money, the boys, as I call them, though they are all married and fathers, got a really rude, flat, and, in my opinion, senseless turn down. So that's why the story I'm writing is in these pages. The boys have not asked anybody for a single cent for what they've got. All they wanted was to be reimbursed for their out-of-pocket expenses. This has been done. For the rest, they need sufficient funds to mount a properly equipped but trained small group to go into this or another wilderness area for a full year to stage a real hunt for a Bigfoot, captured alive or on film, or else at least for a skull or other physical evidence. The most common question asked me about these Bigfoot of California and the similar Sasquatches of Canada is, why has nobody ever seen one? The answer to this is, they have, and by the hundreds, and for 100 years, let alone the earlier sightings by local Indians. One is even alleged to have been captured on the Trans-Canada Railroad's tracks in 1884, to have been examined by medical men and held in captivity for some time. It was even mentioned in official dispatches to the Crown by the then colonial governor of British Columbia. Further, I personally took an extended trip in 1959 to the west, covering just about every area from Alaska to California and even the Canadian Northwest Territories, interviewing several dozen people who said they had encountered these creatures. All of my findings up to 1961 went into my book, mentioned earlier. Since then, however, further reports have continued to stream in at a minimum of once a month. Meantime, 8 groups that I know of went into the field, apart from Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, and I know the last have several scores of interviews on tape with other witnesses. What is more, none other than Dr. Vladimir Martok, Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Calgary, Alberta, made 2 trips to the same area and assessed the current reports 2 years ago. The next most common question from non-zoologists, that is usually, why, if there are so many of these big creatures running around, haven't we ever found a single bone of one? My answer is simply to go and ask any game warden, real woodsman, or professional animal collector if he has ever found the dead body or even a bone of any wild animal, except along roads, of course, or if killed by man. I never have, in 40 years, in 5 continents. No, nature takes care of her own, and damned fast, too. But there is another point here. These creatures are apparently not even tribalized. In fact, they seem to be lone hunters or gatherers, forming only small family parties that break up as soon as the youngsters can get along on their own. Unlike the next stage up the ladder to people, they do not seem to bury their dead. If they did, we might have stumbled across their ritual burial grounds, even in caves, though such are rarities, where they are reported to live. Then there is another very prevalent notion. Almost everybody except zoologists, and even many of them, seems to believe that no big, new animals could still remain undiscovered. This is a complete fallacy. First, despite all the howls about our population explosion, more than half of the land surface of the earth has not yet been mapped or, for the most part, even penetrated. Further, the world's second bulkiest land animal, Cotton's wide-lipped rhinoceros, was not found until 1910, and the forest giraffe, or okapi, until 1911, and the giant sable antelope until 1929. Then there's the copri, the second largest ox, found in Indochina in 1956, and, of course, the coelacanth fish in 1938, thought to have been extinct for some 70 million years. I might add that 2 herds, numbering 400 and 300 head respectively, of forest bison, believed to have existed in not too pure a form in only one national park in Canada, turned up in 1960 only 80 miles from the new road going to Great Bear Lake. The Komodo dragon, which is the largest known reptile, wasn't discovered until 1912. The mountain gorilla, an ape species peculiar to Africa, was a native legend for centuries, just like Bigfoot and the abominable snowman, but he wasn't established as a real creature by scientists until 1901. The other most asked question comes from the zoologists and professional anthropologists. It is really twofold. How could such a creature be in the North American continent? Because not one single bone or tooth of any true monkey, as opposed to the South American monkeys, which are quite different, and much less an ape, has ever been found here. This is true, but then the same people turn right around and state that our Bigfoot, the Oma, and Sasquatches are hominids, meaning on the human branch of our old family tree. This I find to be completely ridiculous and totally unscientific. Let me explain. First, let us leave monkeys of all kinds out of it, and concentrate on what scientists call the pongids, or apes, the hominids, or man-types. True, no ape has turned up on this continent, and I'm not surprised because they are tropical animals, and although there have been mild temperature times in the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, they have no reason to go meandering all the way up there and over here. The hominids, on the other hand, were represented by several types that lived in cold climates, even up to the ice front, in the case of the Neanderthalers. What is more, hominids in the form of what we call humans, i.e. Homo sapiens, such as our American Indians and later the Eskimos, seem to have been able to get here over the land bridge, or the ice bridge at least, according to all the professional scientists. So, may I ask, why is it so all-fired impossible for earlier human types to have done the same? Also, would some anthropologist please explain how our brown bears, elk, moose, and so on got over here from Northeast Asia, where they originated? You can't have it both ways. Either these things are apes, or they're man-like creatures. Everybody says they look like men, even if dressed in monkey suits. Men have gotten here, but the apes have not. Isn't this exactly what the true scientists have been saying all along? Bob and Roger feel that these creatures are definitely human, or at least what scientists call hominid. They may be the last of their race or subspecies or other species of us people, and Bob and Roger want them conserved or at least given a chance. Above all, they don't want mobs armed with high-powered automatic rifles barging in by the thousands and driving the already overworked and understaffed sheriffs, local and state police out of their minds. Another point. The Minister of Recreation for the Canadian Cabinet, Mr. Kenneth Kirian, has expressed sincere interest in these efforts. So also has our Secretary of the Interior, the Honorable Stuart Udall. The conservation angle to all this is serious enough, but there are other angles that we will not get into at this time. Now comes the end of the story. The leading news media, but not the working press, I should stress, treated this whole thing as an uproarious joke. But one of our leading picture magazines showed genuine interest and arranged for the films and outtakes to be shown to representatives of the Departments of Zoology and Anthropology of the American Museum of Natural History. Once again, as in Canada, the press wire services were on hand, but were informed, in closed session, I am told, by these experts that the whole thing was nothing but a colossal hoax. The exact expression used by their spokesperson being, as reported to me, not kosher. And the reason is alleged to have been simply that such a creature as depicted was impossible. The use of this term, in this case, seemed to imply that while considered a hoax, it was short of a fraud, but if the creature depicted is impossible, then, for my money, it can only be a man-made thing and thus an outright fraudulent design. I have failed to receive any suggestions for a third alternative. This is manifestly a most unsatisfactory situation. Furthermore, their verdict pronounced upon the pictures was handed down so fast that no time could have been given for a proper, thorough, and truly scientific examination of the pictures to have been made. Finally, the existence of such a creature is not impossible. So we, Argosy that is, decided to do something practical. We did. It took time, patience, and real cooperation from several other leading scientists. This is what we did. First, our publisher, Mr. Harry Steger, picked up the tab for the film and pictures so that Bob and Roger and Al could get home for a couple of days for Thanksgiving. Next, I and my friend and partner Desmond Slattery drove down to Washington, D.C., where we set up a showing of the film and outtakes and blow-ups of all kinds. Then Argosy editor Milt Macklin flew down with the film and brought his son Jason along, since he is a budding photographer and an electronics wizard as well, in that he ran 2 tape recordings at different speeds for 5 solid hours. We then assembled the following persons. 1. Mr. N.O. Wood, Jr., Director of Management Operations for the U.S. Department of Interior, representing the Honorable Secretary of that Department, Stuart Udall, on his written request to us. 2. Dr. A. Joseph Raitt, Chief Geographer, U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, currently of the U.S. Department of Commerce, also a human ecologist. 3. Dr. John R. Napier, Doctor of Science, Director of Primate Biology Program, the Smithsonian Institution, world-known expert on human, ape, and monkey musculature movement and the anatomy of their hands and feet. 4. Dr. Vladimir Marktok, Associate Professor of Archaeology in the University of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. 5. Dr. Alan Bryan, Professor of Anthropology at the University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada. Also present were several of us on the other side of the fence. Let me call them the journalists or newsboys or whatever you want. In addition to Des Slattery and Milt Macklin and myself, there was present Tom Allen, currently writer and editor on the editorial staff of the National Geographic Society. Tom has been a working newsman all his life. For 7 years, a feature writer and editor of the Sunday New York Daily News, and then managing editor of Chilton Books in Philadelphia. During a 4-hour session, the films and stills were shown, examined under high magnification, challenged, questioned, argued about, and studied. The scientists did not agree on all points. They did not even all see exactly the same details in the often hard-to-read blow-ups. But after careful scrutiny over a period of hours, not one voiced the suspicion that there was a vague possibility that someone with enormous funds, a strange, undecipherable motivation, a disregard for life and limb, and an enormous knowledge of anatomy, physiology, photography, and human psychology might have been clever enough to set up a hoax good enough to fool the top experts in their field. In addition, in a separate screening, the film was shown to Dr. Osman Hill, head of the Yerkes Regional Primate Research Center at Emory University. Dr. Hill said, among other things, "All I can say, that is, if this was a masquerade, it was extremely well done and effective." He also expressed the feeling that this evidence was strong enough to induce some group to mount an expedition to search for further evidence. So what's the next step? At this point, everything clearly indicates the need for a major expedition with helicopters, two-way radios, and possibly dogs to set on the trail of the next Bigfoot scene, though I've heard that dogs usually run the other way when they get a whiff of the Bigfoot spoor. I can guarantee one thing for myself and Argosy magazine. This story is definitely to be continued. Copyright Ivan T. Sanderson, Argosy Magazine, February 1968. Article courtesy of Tom Casino. Colored photographs, article courtesy Chris Murphy and Renee DeHinden, 1999. The Scientific View. Here are the views of three men acknowledged to be top experts in their respective fields concerning the remarkable creatures shown on these films. Dr. A. Joseph Wright, Chief Geographer, U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. His view: the presence of large, hairy, human-like creatures in North and Central America, often referred to as Sasquatch, appears very logical when the physiographic history and the northern part of this continent is considered. The statement often made that monkey-like creatures were never developed in Northern America may easily be discounted, for these creatures are more human-like than ape-like, and they apparently migrated here, rather than representing the product of indigenous evolution. The recent physiographic history of the polar edges of the North America reveals that the land migration of these creatures from Asia to America is a distinct and logical possibility. The compelling reason for this distinct possibility is that a land bridge between Asia and North America is known to have existed several times within the last million years, at various intervals during the Pleistocene or Ice Age. The land bridges, both on the north and south sides of the Bering Sea, were admirably suitable for migrations several times during the Ice Age. It appears then that these hairy, human-like creatures, sometimes called Sasquatch, could easily have migrated to North America at several times during the Ice Age. This is particularly plausible when it is considered that conditions were mild in that area when the land bridges existed. These creatures could have then found conditions along the way similar to their Asian mountain habitat and could naturally have migrated across the bridges. Dr. John R. Napier, Director of Primate Biology Program, Smithsonian Institution. His view: first, I observed nothing that on scientific grounds would point conclusively to a hoax. I am satisfied that the walk of the creature shown in the film was consistent with the biped striding gait of man, except in the action of the feet, which were not visible. I have two reservations that are both subjective. First, the slow cadence of the walk and the fluidity of the bodily movements, particularly the arms, struck me as exaggerated, almost self-conscious in comparison with modern man. Second, my impression was that the subject was male, in spite of the contrary evidence of heavy pendulous breast. The body, the appearance of the high crest on top of the skull is unknown in man, but given a creature is heavily built as the subject, such a biomechanical adaptation to an exclusively fibrous raw vegetable diet is not impossible. The presence of this crest, which occurs only in male non-human primates such as the gorilla and the orangutan, tends to strengthen my belief that this creature is a male. Finally, It might be supposed that the creature with a heavy head, heavy jaw and musculature, and a massive upper body would have a center of gravity placed at a higher level than in man. The position of center of gravity modifies the gait, and the easy stride shown in the film is not in harmony with a high center of gravity. Some of the questions I have raised might be solved by a scientific frame-by-frame analysis of the gait and body proportions, and a study of the joint angulations of limb and displacements. Well, this should be done. The opinions I have expressed on this remarkable film are those of an expert witness, rather than a member of a jury. And Dr. Osman Hill, Director of Yerkes Regional Primate Research Center, Emory University. His view? The creature portrayed is a primate and clearly hominid rather than pongid. Its erect attitude in locomotion, the gait, stride, and manner of that locomotion, as well as the relative proportions of pelvic to pectoral limb, are all manifestly human, together with the great development of the mammary glands. This does not, of course, preclude the possibility that it is indeed a Homo sapiens masquerading as a hairy giant. All I can say at this stage is that if this was a masquerade, it was extremely well done and effective. Without tangible evidence in the form of skeletal parts, a cast of the dentition, or similar physical material, I cannot pronounce beyond this group. However, the most interesting evidence they have so painstakingly produced should serve to stimulate the formation of a truly scientific expedition to the area, with the object of obtaining the required physical data. The biography of Ivan T. Sanderson. Husband to Alma, 1911 through 1973. Sanderson received degrees with honors in geology, zoology, and botany, and headed 6 expeditions in all parts of the world for such groups as the British Museum, Cambridge and London universities, the Linnean Societies of London, and at the Chicago Natural History Museum. He was the author of many books. One, Animal Treasures, was a Book of the Month selection in 1937. Others include The Hairy Primitives of Ancient Europe, 1967, Caribbean Treasure, Animals Nobody Knows, Living Treasure, Animal Tales, How to Know American Mammals, The Monkey Kingdom, and Living Mammals of the World, The Abominable Snowmen, Legend Come to Life, written in 1961, and countless articles for various publications and Argosy magazine, where he was science editor. Argosy, exclusive, first photos, California's Abominable Snowman. This is the end of this reading. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open.